On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Vladimir Putin has lost a kilo. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, the situation on the Black Sea has been escalating quite a bit. I have talked extensively on this channel about the potential of the Black Sea devolving into the Persian Gulf of the 1980s with the tanker war. Well, what we're seeing right now is Russia and Ukraine going back and forth on the Black Sea, with strikes now being executed against fixed targets in Crimea, including some strategic dry docks. What I want to talk about today is two videos that were put out by a great YouTuber. I want to put a commercial slant on that. What we do at What's Going On with Shipping is talk about global shipping as it deals with commercially. So we're going to go ahead and do that in today's episode. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So this is the YouTube channel of H.I. Sutton over at Covert Shores. I heartily recommend you follow him. Subscribe to him. I don't know how he only has 75,000 subscribers. He has been following the conflict on the Black Sea extensively. He is a naval analyst of top-notch caliber, and he has two videos that recently came out. I'm going to use screenshots from them. The videos are Black Sea attacks, first Russian submarine lost in war since World War II, and this one, Ukraine's big success in the Black Sea, why the gas platforms matter. So back in February of 2022, the situation on the Black Sea, specifically in the Gulf of Odesa, was the Ukrainians controlled the Gulf of Odesa shoreline. This is right from H.I. Sutton's video. They controlled Snake Island, but the Russians were sitting here in Crimea. The Black Sea Fleet was based in Sevastopol. And then the Russians controlled these large gas platforms out across the Gulf of Odesa, these big jackleg platforms. And from these platforms, they were able to monitor the coast and monitor shipping coming in and out. Well, war happens in February and March, and now all of a sudden you have this movement taking place where the Russians take Snake Island. They effectively shut the ports along the Ukrainian coast all the way from Odessa down, including coming out of the Danube. And Russia is in a commanding position. The Ukrainians have mined the waters. It's believed that the Russians also mine these waters. And so the situation is the Ukrainians are effectively cut off from the outside world. Then you have, over the spring and summer of 2022, combat on the Black Seas. Everything from the sinking of the Moskva in April of 2022 to the retaking of Snake Island on July 7th of 2022. And that's a key one right there. Pushing back the surface fleet of the Russians out of the Gulf of Odesa, taking back of Snake Island now opens up the path for Ukrainian grain shipments to start coming out of the Danube River. The Danube is the border between Romania and Ukraine. And then in September, the Ukrainians unleash a new weapon, these surface drone vessels. And these maritime drones, this is also from H.I. Sutton, gives you an idea of the types they're using. Maritime drones, uncrewed vessels being used to strike at vessels. We just recently saw a strike that hit a Russian LST and a Russian tanker off the Kerch Straits. These drones are being launched. We don't know exactly from where, whether from the Ukrainian coast. If that's the case, they have to sail great distances, which could account for why the warheads on these vessels are not as big as we think they should be, because they have to trade fuel for basically warhead tonnage. And what we're seeing right now is this conflict being waged in a very unique manner. The Ukrainians have taken back those gas platforms in a series of operations well documented by H.I. Sutton. Again, watch that video. He goes in great detail. But what that has done is really push the front line from off the coast of Ukraine all the way to off the coast of Sevastopol. This means also, by the way, taking a Snake Island has opened up the anchorage here so that ships are going up the Danube to the ports of Izmail and Remy. There was a negotiation after the loss of the Moskva and retaking of Snake Island to put in place what was called the Black Sea Grain Initiative that allowed commercial vessels inspected in Turkey to sail to the Ukrainian ports here along the coast of the Gulf of Odesa to load grain and came out. That agreement lasted for about a year, about 1,000 ships. Ship voyages were executed, but then in July of this year, 2023, the Russians pulled out. In turn, the Ukrainians have announced that they're opening their own corridor along the coast, hugging the Ukrainian coast, and then around the Romanian and Bulgarian coast. So we're seeing the war shift. It really has moved quite a bit at this point. This is marine traffic, and I want to show something here that H.I. Sutton didn't. So in his video on the gas platforms, he talks about 3 key issues, and one of those issues was economic. One of the things is a big economic issue to take back the gas platforms. And H.I. acknowledged that he's not strong on the economic side. I want to talk about that economic side because I think it's a very important element here. So where he showed here, this is the Gulf of Odesa right here. He showed that movement back. And matter of fact, one of the things you see right now is a ship breaking out of the Ukrainian ports. The Puma has been up in Odesa since February of last year. And this ship is now taking advantage of that Ukrainian corridor that has been established. But the element that HI doesn't talk about, which I think is really important, is over here in the Sea of Azov. Just as you saw the Gulf of Odesa shift up northwest and really pin the Ukrainians up against their border, same thing happened here in the Sea of Azov. The northwestern shore of the Sea of Azov, from the Crimean Peninsula all the way up to just east of Mariupol, was controlled by the Ukrainians in February of 2022. That put them astride this main shipping lane coming out of the Kerch Strait up to Rostov-on-Don. And this shipping lane is the key aspect for Russia, I would argue, in the conflict. I understand the land component, but on the maritime component, this is it. The Ukrainians controlled the northern shore of the Sea of Azov, which meant in this narrow little strait right here by Mariupol and Berdansk, they could put artillery, surface-to-surface missiles, and cut Russia's access to the sea. Understand, the Don River, which Rostov is on, is the Mississippi River of Russia. It goes to the Caspian, to the Volga, to the Moscow Canal. It actually links all the way up to the Baltic and the White Sea. If you look at the interior of Russia, it is crisscross with shipping that goes all the way into the interior, up into the Caspian, this whole area right here. And if you effectively cut off this chain of ships heading to the Kerch Strait, you can strangle economically Russia. This is why we've seen attacks on the Kerch Strait Bridge, on the anchorage off of the Kerch Strait, on the port of Novorossiysk. This is why the Ukrainians have been staging these long-range, unmanned surface vessel attacks against them. This is the economic side. So just as the Russians push the Ukrainians northwest, now we see the Ukrainians pushing the Russians southeast, and we're seeing that on land too. The Ukrainian drive here is to get to this coast, to sever the overland connection to Crimea, and potentially grab Berdansk and Mariupol back, which could effectively cut off trade from the interior of Russia to the sea. And this is a critical issue for the Russians. The Russians have countered this, obviously, with their own strikes. So, for example, they have been hitting extremely hard the ports along the Danube River. We're seeing these Russian drone strikes on the ports of Izmail and Remy having an impact. The shoreside storage areas, the grain elevators are being hit on a consistent basis. This is impacting the offloading, loading of vessels, meaning that the Ukrainians are seeing a dip in the amount of grain they can get out, more so even with the end of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We also see reports from the British that the UK intelligence is claiming Russia is actively targeting international merchant ships. There was a allegation by the UK that the Russians fired 2 missiles at a ship in the port of Odesa, potentially the Puma. We're just seeing sailing right now, but those missiles were intercepted. It's hard to identify whether the Russians are shooting at the ships or the grain facilities ashore, but this is coming out of the UK. And again, we're seeing that also on multiple different areas. So again, Russia is escalating its attacks on the shore side of Ukraine by hitting their port. So that brings me to the recent attacks on Crimea and why they're important. And again, I want to use scenes from H.I. Sutton's video, give him full attribution. You can check out the full video up above here. So one of the things that has been happening is Ukraine has been hitting anti-air sites along Crimea, trying to open up the airspace so that they can get in and launch these styles of attacks, which have been very effective. I want to show you a video here that was of the video of these attacks not too long ago. This is a video showing the most recent attacks on Sevastopol. And you can see what are believed to be, it sounds like cruise missile attacks or air-to-surface missiles being launched based on the sound you're hearing of missiles coming in. Those attacks were focused against the naval dry dock in Sevastopol, where two ships were in the two separate dry docks. One was an improved Kilo-class submarine. The Russians have a fleet of Kilo submarines in the Black Sea. The improved ones, in particular like Rostov-on-Don, ironically named for this key port that the Ukrainians and Russians are driving for. The Rostov-on-Don can fire what are called caliber missiles. These are cruise missiles that have been being used by the Russians to attack. They also have a surface-to-surface capability against ships. And then a Rapucha-class landing ship, very similar to the one that was hit off the Kerch Straits. This is the Minsk, and the Minsk was in the dry dock in Sevastopol. This is a satellite image of that dry dock. Again, open source intelligence coming out. The image above here in the upper right shows you the Minsk in the west dry dock, and then the Rostov-on-Don, the Kilo submarine, in the east dry dock. And then these show you the after images. You can see extensive damage being done against the submarine and against the Minsk here. You actually have a tugboat or a fireboat here just above the gates. There are images of it spraying water onto the Minsk, and you see a great deal of damage against these vessels. This image shows you a picture of the Minsk. You can see the damage to the LST. And matter of fact, one of the things Covert Shores did is this kind of superimposed graphic showing how the funnel mast have collapsed. These are probably aluminum or light steel superstructure. And if you create enough heat, you'll see these areas of the superstructure collapse. This image was released by the UK government from their satellite imagery, showing the damage being done. Again, they're reporting extensive damage to both these vessels. So what I want to talk about is the dry dock itself. And so this is an image of the dry dock pulled from H.I. Sutton's video at a different time period here. The dry dock on the left, this is the one that is holding the Kilo submarine. You can see blocks on the ground here. So when vessels come in, they sit on wooden blocks. And on the right here, what appears to be a bulk carrier or cargo vessel in the right dock. Notice a couple of things. One of the things we saw in the images were the cranes. The cranes seem to be standing still upright at this time. You will notice that these are what we call graving docks. And so these are literally built out of the land. You just basically scoop them out and then you brick them in or block them in so that you can create these dry docks. These right here, the doors to these dry docks are caissons. These are actually floated in and out of place. So what you do is you actually float this gate into position. And then when you pump out the dry dock, the water here pushes against the caisson and creates the seal. So not a lot of moving parts here. It's not like a door that swings open or not. You just float the caisson off. It appears from the images we saw that the caissons are not damaged. It is really difficult to damage a dry dock. Dry docks are just, as I said, holes in the ground. So extremely difficult. These areas here, it's not exactly clear where the pump housing is, the ability to pump them out. Usually there are at the bottom here drains so that you can drain out the dry dock, and they have a pump which pumps that water back into the harbor. But again, it's not clear. We did notice that the tug firing into the dry dock was spraying water, but there's an image later I'll show you where there doesn't appear to be a lot of water at the bottom of the dry dock, which may indicate that the pump is working. Just to be clear, even if you do knock out the pump housings, you can still bring in portable pumps to pump the dock out. It's slower, not as efficient, but it can be done. If you look at World War II, there were two great examples of this that were done in World War II. So the first example comes from Pearl Harbor. This is the destroyer Shaw in Floating Dry Dock 2. Shaw was hit up forward and its forward magazine blew, sank the dry dock and itself came down. But very quickly afterwards, not only was Shaw recovered, but the floating dry dock was put back into operating condition. It was able to be patched and repaired. The other vessels at Pearl Harbor in dry dock number 1 were the destroyers Cassin and Downs. Here are Cassin and Downs. You can see one of the destroyers has actually fallen off its blocks on to the other one. Again, this dry dock was not damaged. The problems you had here was the damage inflicted on the destroyers had to be repaired, the ships had to be righted, and then floated out. They still used dry dock number 1. They were able to get the battleship Pennsylvania, for example, out from behind them by flooding the dry dock and actually bring in another ship until they were able to drain the dock out and remove Cassin and Downs. And perhaps the most famous dry dock attack in World War II is this. This is the destroyer Campbelltown. A British destroyer, actually it was a U.S. destroyer that was given to the British under the 50 destroyer bases deal. This destroyer was modified to look like a German escort vessel, and then in a very daring commando attack, it was rammed onto what was called the Normandy dock in Saint Nazaire. The ramming did not damage the caisson sufficiently, but the bow of the vessel was packed with explosives, and shortly after this photo was taken, the destruction blew the caisson apart, flooding the dry dock, and that dry dock was out of action actually until 1950. This image here shows you the Minsk. This is that Rapucha LST in the dry dock, and a couple of things stand out for me on this. Number one, if you look below there, you'll notice the dry dock is not flooded, which means the caisson is intact. You can see a tug or fireboat there spraying water. In that case, they're spraying it on Rostov-on-Don, the submarine on the east dry dock. But here you can definitely see, we know water was being sprayed on the Minsk. The fire looks pretty well either extinguished or burnt out at this time. So what they're going to have to do is ensure that these vessels can float, make sure there's no compromise of their hulls, and then they can begin to flood the dry docks and get these vessels out of them. So this strike on Sevastopol was significant, obviously. You've taken out a submarine, the first submarine taken out on the surface by a missile since the Falklands War of 1982, when the Santa Fe was lost. You have a hit on this LST that looks like a mission kill, probably a mission kill on the Kilo, although the Russian government is saying they're going to repair them. But it does look like the dry docks are still intact. The question is, will Russia use those dry docks again? Because since they're fixed positions, if you can launch surface to air to surface cruise missiles, you know the Latin longitude of those areas. They're fixed, so you can hit vessels when they're in them. This could conceivably force the Russians to abandon those dry docks and have to use the dry dock further east at Novorossiysk, or shift over to commercial dry docks and put the Ukrainians in the position of taking out commercial facilities. Really tough position for Russia to be in. They're definitely losing on the Black Sea right now. Concurrently with this, we saw an attack against a convoy that was in the midst of the Black Sea. Again, this is from H.I. Sutton, a convoy of two vessels, one a tanker, the Yaz, the sister ship to the Sig. This was the tanker that was hit off the Kerch Straits. And then the Ursa Major, which is a known Russian arms-carrying vessel. They were being escorted by two patrol vessels when they were attacked by surface drones. Supposedly, the Russian vessels were able to destroy the surface drones. Again, these surface drones don't have a lot of defense at all. They're easy to detect, and these Russian patrol ships have pretty good gun armament on board. But these vessels were able to get to the Turkish Strait, but it does indicate an attack against Russian shipping on the Black Sea. And again, I keep coming back to this issue that the attacks on these vessels could be an indication that we're seeing an escalation, that while Russia is on the defensive and the Ukrainians are taking the attacks onto the Black Sea into Russian ports, the question is, will Russia respond with that? Russia's in a pretty good position right now. Their trade volumes are back up at pre-war levels, exactly where they want to be. That means Russian goods are getting out of ports. We know Russia is trading above the price cap of diesel and oil right now. So Ukraine's attacks have the potential to undermine the Russian economy. The question is, does Russia retaliate against that huge anchorage of vessels off the Danube, hitting not just Ukrainian vessels, but ships of open registries, ships owned by companies and other entities out there? Does this indicate an escalation of the war? Will Ukraine, now that they've got Russia pushed back up against the Crimean Peninsula in the Gulf of Odesa, run ships up to Ukraine? There's still a batch of Kilo submarines out there. The Russians still have a lot of capabilities out there. Even though Russia seems to be on the losing end here, they have a lot of potentially assets they can use: air assets, surface assets, and subsurface assets. Not to mention the fact that they can start mining like crazy. So the situation on the Black Sea is definitely ratcheting up, as we worried about early on in this channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a patron of the page. And be sure to check out H.I. Sutton's YouTube channel, and he's a great follow on Twitter at Covert Shores, along with his naval analysis and news. Until our next episode, this is Sal signing off.